Well, when I was little, I was introduced to them. My grandparents had a farm, and they always had them. They collect the eggs all summer, and by the fall, well, you know what happens to chickens in the fall. Yeah, we cut their heads off, skin them, get rid of all the feathers, and cook them up as a great meal. Chickens. But what do they have to do with the automotive industry? Well, chickens are involved with one of the worst tariffs of all time, the chicken tax, a tax on light trucks and vans into the United States. This is the reason why a lot of the great mid-sized trucks you find around the world, from Isuzu to Volkswagen, don't exist on American shores. And today, AutoLooks is going to dive deep into the chicken tax. Welcome back to the AutoLooks podcast. I am your host, as always, the doctor to the automotive industry, Mr. Everett J, coming to you from our host website at AutoLooks.net. If you haven't been there, stop by, check it out, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links website page. Big or small, we have them all. Car companies from around the globe, all in one centralized location on the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over email at AutoLooks.net. So like I said in the beginning, chickens. We've all eaten chickens. Well, maybe not all of us out in the world, but they are a staple of nations around the globe, and a lot of people eat chickens. In a sense, when you think about it, they're a very disgusting and disturbing animal. They'll eat just about anything you throw at them. And in the end, we all just deep fry, barbecue, or even boil them and eat them. But what does that have to do with the United States? Well, chickens were a big part of trade after World War II. And because of these chickens, we don't get products like the Volkswagen Amarok, the Isuzu D-Max, or hell, even the new Mazda BT50. Even though these companies exist within our shores, we can't have these mid-sized trucks because any light truck or van, cargo van, minivans excluded, can't be sold in American shores unless they are built here. And it all stems back to 1961. That point in time, the chicken tax, a 25% tariff on light trucks and vans into the United States marketplace. And because Canada is so tied in with the Americans, this is imposed through us because most major companies import products into the United States before they come to Canada. So even us are included in the Great White North due to this stupid chicken tax. It was imposed in 1964 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. And this was in retaliation as a response to the tariffs placed by France and West Germany on the importation of United States chickens. Originally, the Americans had fired back and included tariffs on both potato starch, dextrin, and brandy as well, but eventually it just fell back to light trucks and vans. Post-World War II, Europe. Luxury was slowly becoming a staple food in the United States. Chicken was considered a luxury food. Even though everybody had them, we used them more for eggs than actually eating. And it really wasn't until after World War II that chickens became so widespread, and even in the American shores. Over in Europe, chickens were still a big part of their economy, but not as big as the United States. We had more room to have more chickens. So if people want to eat more chickens, as opposed to just having eggs from them, we need more space because we now need space for both egg-laying chickens and consumption chickens. So in a sense, chicken was considered a luxury due to the fact that edible chickens was in low production across the European Union. Europe started importing most of its actual consumption chicken from the United States. And due to this, the consumption of chicken in Europe grew by 23% just in West Germany by 1961. And the Americans were reaping the benefits the most because they were importing all of their chickens to Europe because Europe is now fancying chicken. You gotta remember, this is 1961. KFC isn't here yet. By this time, the U.S. had captured nearly half of the European market. And due to the increase in demand, chicken prices began to quickly fall during the 1950s and early 60s across both Europe and the United States. This led to accusations of the U.S. dumping inexpensive chickens due to their massive quantities of land use in the United States. The Europeans thought the Americans were literally just dumping tons and tons of chickens onto their shores shores to ensure that the prices stayed low and that Europe, due to the fact that land is a little more valuable than in the United States, they wouldn't be able to compete with them. The first accusations were made by the Dutch, who were one of the largest producers of chickens in the European Union. Eventually, this led to France banning U.S. chicken due to concerns of hormones being added in, which can affect male virility. Now, this is something that has actually come to light over the decades, and yet people today still don't believe it. German Farmers Association started to accuse the U.S. of fattening their chickens with arsenic as well, leading to an increase in health concerns across the European Union. This eventually led to a crisis in the trade relations between both Germany, France, and most of the European Union with the United States. Europe was looking to become a little bit more self-sufficient now that their economies were starting to grow after the end of World War II. You gotta remember, the American economy wasn't affected by World War II. We just switched from automobile production to war production, and once it was over, we switched back to automobile production. We didn't have to rebuild our cities like the Europeans did. With their economies starting to thrive in the 1950s and the economies being rebuilt by this time, they were looking to become a little bit more self-sufficient so they wouldn't have to rely on everybody across the globe. France was the first to impose a tariff to help stabilize the price of chickens across Europe, and they posed this directly against the United States chicken farmers. France had hoped to gain more market share from the US and West Germany because of this. Unfortunately, it did not work in their favor as the Americans still had the numbers to push their product. This really didn't fare out as well as they thought. Europe adopted a common agricultural policy imposing a minimum import prices on all chicken, nullifying prior tariffs, bindings, and concessions which had already been imposed. Now all of Europe was on an even playing field, except for the fact that they lacked supply. As long as they could increase their supply to meet the increasing demand, the Europeans can now compete against the Americans. But the Americans were not happy about this, nor would anybody be happy about this, including today China getting massive tariffs on their electric vehicles in the European Union. The United States decided to fight back. As soon as they lost 25% of the market share, and gotta remember, they owned over half of the market share across Europe, 23% just in West Germany. So when you lose 25% of that entire market in 1 year because of this brand new agricultural policy, you start to get a little bit pissed off because it's going to start hurting you where it really counts, the bank. The 25% drop in the first year alone cost the Americans $26 million in 1961, which equates to over $300 million today. So that's not a little pittance. That is a massive quantity of money that they lost. $300 million in 1 year. Anybody who runs a company knows even losing $300 in 1 year to odd things for myself makes me reconsider what the hell is going on. And like myself, that year, Senator J. William Fulbright from Arkansas, one of the biggest American poultry producing states, interrupted a NATO meeting on nuclear amendment to protest these trade sanctions. He literally stood up and protested this 25% tariff against his country's chicken, which was damaging the farmers from his home state at a NATO meeting over nuclear arms. Gotta remember, this is the 60s. This is during the Cold War, when we're trying to stop the world from gaining nuclear bombs. The senator even threatened to cut the amount of U.S. troops to NATO. You have to remember, in the 60s, the Americans were one of the biggest contributors to NATO policing globally. So for them to cut their amount, NATO was listening. But unfortunately, diplomacy failed, and over the next 18 months, so by December 1963, the U.S. started to impose their own chicken tax against the European Union. This was a 25% tariff on potato starch, dextrin, brandy, and light trucks and vans, which came into effect in January of 1964 of this fabled chicken tax. So remember, 1964, 60 years ago. We're coming up with the 61st anniversary of this happening. This was meant to offend nations that may increase tariffs by an equal amount to the losses discriminating against their own tariffs. That's why they chose chose to do it. Johnson proclaimed that the U.S. had invoked its right under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade to impose these, where they'd been attacked from this. Similar to the Canadian and American softwood lumber dispute, how the Americans consider Canada as dumping tons and tons of lumber onto their market to cut into their home shares, only because we have an abundance of softwood lumber compared to them. We're not dumping them, we just have more of it. But they want to stabilize their price, similar to how the European Union was trying to stabilize the price of chickens and trying to make it so that the Americans didn't own a complete monopoly of their market. You kind of understand why they did it, but this is trade. Johnson eventually added light trucks to the mix. This is a bad time because by 1964, Volkswagen was just starting to import the Type 2 commercial van and truck into the U.S. marketplace. The tariff would halt the sale of any new Type 2 microbuses for commercial use in the American marketplace. So if you're actually out in the world and you find a Volkswagen microbus Type 2 commercial van or cab over trucks, they both had single and dual cab ones from 1964, hold on to it because that was the last year these vehicles were available in the American marketplace due to the chicken tax. This really pissed off Volkswagen as the Type 2 was their second product, and not being included in the commercialized sales in the North American marketplace, which was growing, they were literally being kicked in the balls. But it wasn't something they did. It's something their country was doing. This would eventually become a thorn in Volkswagen's side. The U.S. automotive market was one of the largest in the world, and without sales of the Type 2 commercial vans, Volkswagen only had the Beetle and Type 2 bus to rely on for its expansion in the American marketplace. You have to think about it. Had they been able to have those sales of the commercial products and their trucks, maybe Volkswagen would have moved further in to the Golf, the Fox, hell, even the Carmagia a lot faster. Because without that market, they weren't making the money. West Germany's value of the Type 2's decline to $5.6 million, or 1/3 of the previous year's value. So roughly $56 million Volkswagen lost that first year due to not being able to sell those commercial vans in the American marketplace. It nearly wiped out the Type 2 from the North American marketplace, but being the 1960s, decade about flower power, and the microbus being so synonymous with van culture and peace and love, the microbus stayed in our market share. That and the fact that they finally added the camper option to the North American marketplace just made it so that the people could now have an affordable camper to go out and explore the world with. This tax would eventually affect companies like Toyota, Isuzu, Mazda, and Datsun, who were just starting to get into the truck marketplace. All of these vehicles would eventually be pulled from both the American and Caribbean marketplaces due to the new tariffs, as everything came through the American shores before they went to both the Caribbean marketplace or even Canadian marketplace on top of the Americans. The tax would prove to become a major nuisance to automakers as well as countries that were hit with this tax on their light vehicles. This would impede the marketplace from having fuel-efficient small trucks and vans during the 1960s, which could have helped them significantly during the gas crisis of the 1970s. But the Detroit automakers lobbied for this tax to stay in place and is still holding its rights today to keep the American truck industry as it is. And even to this day, with the Detroit 3, with one of them even being owned by a European counterpart, they still lobby to keep this tax in place. This has kept the small trucks out of our market and made it difficult for anybody who wanted to compete with the big three on their home turf. Once the gas crisis in the 1970s proved to us that we need smaller pickup trucks, the American big three, were starting to look for a way to bring these vehicles in. They created a collaboration with Japanese automakers to gain access to American manufacturing sites. So Toyota, Mazda, Datsun, Mitsubishi, and Isuzu were all getting into bed with the big three to find a way they can utilize their American manufacturing sites to build their light vehicles on our shores. And before long, American companies would soon have small American-built but Japanese-engineered trucks. If you never remember them, the little Mazda rotary engine pickup truck from the 1970s, hell, that's a Ford Courier. Dodge and Plymouth, the Dodge 50 and the Plymouth Arrow, Mitsubishis. Everybody knows about the tie-up between both Mitsubishi and Chrysler and Ford and Mazda. General Motors and Isuzu, along with Toyota. Hell, even Datsun was bringing stuff over for the GM squad. They were all doing this so that they would have an entry point and the Americans would have trucks for the fuel-efficient minded consumers. Before long, the American companies would soon have their small American-built vehicles. And eventually this would lead to the brand new burgeoning compact and mid-sized truck markets of the late 1960s. 1970s, which carried all the way on until the mid-2000s. Unfortunately, due to this tax, a lot of great trucks have never made it to our shores. Crossover utility trucks are one of those grayish areas, and some of them did manage to slip by, similar to that of the Volkswagen Rabbit Caddy. But due to this, a lot of these great car companies never introduced any of their vehicles to our shores, which is kind of sad because there's some great, amazing products out there that we've never had on our shores. Volkswagen has wanted for a very long time to bring the Amarok here, but no American companies will free up space to build the Amarok. Ford has gotten into bed with them for vans now, for the European marketplaces, and for electric vehicle powertrains, but they refuse to allow Volkswagen to get into bed with them to build the Amarok for the North American marketplace. Similar to that, how Ford finally sold off their final shares in Mazda, the BT50 today is not built by a Ford Ranger. It's an Isuzu platform. The funny thing with Isuzu is Isuzu builds the Canyons and Colorados for General Motors, but they also build them in North America. They're engineered as Isuzu products with the Isuzu engine, but Isuzu doesn't sell here because GM doesn't sell its vehicles here anymore. And without foreign ownership of the companies, we only get American-built trucks. That's it. Any commercial vans or any pickup trucks in the North American marketplace have to be built within the confines of either Canada, the United States, or Mexico. And Mexico is kind of an iffy one right now with the way the American economy and government is going. This is part of a fallout of the mid-sized truck market in the 2000s. And as we fell on the mid-sized market in the 2000s, a lot of these car companies, unless they were building them on our shores, started to disappear. Mitsubishi lost the Raider as the Dakota disappeared. Mazda completely gone because Ford stopped building the Ranger. And Isuzu completely disappeared from automobile production of our shores when General Motors got rid of the original Colorados and Canyons. But as the mid-sized market has been coming back, the Ranger's back, the Colorado, the Canyon, they're all here. And two Japanese mid-sized trucks have managed to stay on, the Tacoma and the Frontier. But both of them being built in North America after their tie-ups with other car companies, they now build these on our shores and have gained enough market share to warrant them being built on our shores for our marketplace to sustain their viability. But the funny thing is, even though we lost the mid-sized market in the mid-2000s and it's starting to come back now, we still don't have products like the cool little Utes. They're starting to come in, like the Santa Cruz, the Ridgeline, and the new Ford Mavericks. But will Dodge bring their Utes to our marketplace? Similar to how Subaru managed to find a loophole in this tax. If you go back to the late 1970s, Subaru managed to bring a pickup truck to the North American marketplace with the Subaru Brat. Now, how did they do it? Well, building it in Japan and shipping it over here. This wasn't like a knockdown kit or anything like that. This is a fully built vehicle. Subaru found that by having two rearward-facing passenger seats that were 100% safety because they had seat belts and were mounted properly in the box, the Brat could be sold as a utility vehicle for the North American market. The Brat found a loophole. By two rearward-facing seats, they managed to pass the vehicle off as a passenger vehicle, not a truck. And they beat the system. Mercedes eventually would do this with their van lineups. Remember the old Sprinter vans? When they first came here, they were shipped in parts to their facility in South Carolina as knockdown kits, which were eventually reassembled in the United States. Well, being manufactured solely in Germany, but for final assembly on American shores, it bypassed the tariff because they were shipping in parts, not completed vehicles. Chevrolet did this with the LUV. It was shipped without a box. This is the original Chevrolet small pickup truck built by Nissan. It was shipped to America as a chassis cab truck, similar to a knockdown kit, so there's no box on the back of the vehicle. And this only made it so it was imposed with a 4% import tariff, not 25%. That's how the Japanese managed to figure this out. A lot of these small car companies, like Mazda, Toyota, found this loophole. So they would assemble the box or have the box shipped over separately and piece these trucks together on our shores. They would ship a chassis. So essentially, the passenger compartment on top of the frame, fully assembled and ready to go, just without a box. With a box on it, it's considered a light truck, but without a box, it's considered a chassis, an unfinished product, which you can ship to North America. That's how those big, giant cube vans make it to our shores. They don't have to be built here because they come here as chassis. Unfortunately, in the light truck duty, this loophole was eventually closed up in the 1980s, and the reason why the compact pickup truck market completely disappeared by the mid-80s. With that loophole closed, the Japanese counterparts couldn't find a way to bring their vehicles into from the North American shores unless they built them here. But by that time, the Japanese automakers were either manufacturing in the US or had their own plants, building them with American counterparts. By 1989, SUVs were added to the light truck classification. This meant that big, burly vehicles from the European Union, like the Land Rover Defender, wasn't able to come over here because it now classified under the chicken tax. But SUVs weren't a growing marketplace at this point in time. No, it was trucks. The SUV craze was nearly a decade away, so nobody was worried about that. The funniest thing is that over the years, people have tried to figure out all these loopholes. Subaru with the Brat, Mercedes with their Sprinter vans with knockdown kits, the Japanese shipping their small trucks over here as chassis. Ford is one of the top ones that managed to get around this, one of the most recent ones to get around the chicken tax. And they got hit with a massive fine for circumnavigating the chicken tax. Ford wanted to bring the transit vans to the North American marketplace. After the Econoline was pulled from the marketplace by the late 2000s with nothing in the winds to be replaced, and trying to use that production facility to build more F-150s as the growing truck market was just taking off, Ford wanted to utilize their massive manufacturing plant in Turkey, which built the transit vans, to bring them to North America. But unfortunately, they couldn't do this because of the chicken tax. So how do you get around it? Ford was smart. They remembered what Subaru did with the rearward-facing seats. That didn't classify it as a truck. But these were vans. How do we get around that? Well, it's a lot easier. Commercial vans can be retrofitted with extra seats inside of them, and that's what they were doing. Ford, the largest import of light trucks made to navigate around this, were the transit vans. They were manufactured in Turkey, and all products headed to America were fitted with additional rear seats and seat belts, so it looked like they were going to be used as passenger vans, because this didn't qualify for the chicken tax. Once they hit our shores, they were brought to a warehouse in Baltimore, Maryland, the WWL's Vehicle Series America warehouse, to be exact, in Baltimore, Maryland, along with the rear window panels. So when they shipped them, they didn't ship them like a commercial van. They had the sides with panels, but the sliding doors on the side, the rear doors, had glass in them, so they had to be replaced. Once they hit the Baltimore, Maryland plant, those window panels were replaced with steel panels for commercial vehicles, and the rear seats were removed. The seats and windows were not shipped back, but they were sent to Ohio to a plant that Ford had to have them completely shredded to ensure that Ford would never get caught. Because if they tried to ship them back, the American government would be trying to figure out, why is Ford shipping only these select parts over? Like, these are for vans. Well, why are you shipping them here and then shipping them? Wait a minute. And Ford did this for years. You have to remember, this tax did not impede sales of the Type 2 microbus, as it was considered a passenger vehicles with rear seats, similar to the Subaru Brat. Ford was exploiting this loophole for their benefit. And from 2002 to the time they got caught in 2018, it took them 16 years to figure this out. Ford had saved over $250 million in taxes. Yeah, they screwed Uncle Sam out of $250 million in chicken tax. Unfortunately, by 2018, Ford was caught, and they had to pay over $1 billion, that's with the B, in fines and back taxes on the tariffs. But because of this, the other American counterparts were figuring things out. Ever notice Ram had the ProMaster City here for a very short time? Same with Chevrolet and their small van. Once Ford got caught, the two of them pulled right out. Chrysler did this with the Ram ProMaster. Second Ford got caught, ProMaster shipments were canceled, and the ProMaster City was pulled from their market long before they were ever caught. They could still go back and sue them for this, but considering the fact they made an example out of Ford, let the other ones go. They only did it for like a year or two, whatever. One of the last companies to try and get around this was Mahindra. And the funny thing is, I actually saw a couple of these being brought in when they finally got around it to be used as mining vehicles. Yeah, don't ask me why, but they wanted to use them as supervisor mining vehicles for underground. There's a company in Sudbury that actually builds them. It's kind of neat, but not really. Mahindra tried to do this by creating the Roxor and selling it in North America. They got tired of selling tractors in the North American marketplace, and they wanted to sell their vehicles here. So they wanted to build the Roxor. And because it looked like a Jeep, they felt they could sell it here because people want to buy a Wrangler cheaper. And at that point in time, the Bronco wasn't back. So it was just the Jeep. Mahindra decided to use that loophole of knockdown kits to bring the Roxor over to North America. Unfortunately, Chrysler caught wind of this and filed a class action lawsuit against them due to the appeal of the Roxor looking like a previous generation Jeep Wrangler. By the time the lawsuit was over, Mahindra had pulled out of their site. Their plant in Michigan was still in operation, but on limited scale. Instead of selling it as a vehicle built for the road, Mahindra was going to sell this as a side-by-side ATV. Because hell, the ATV market doesn't have anything like this. But the funny thing is when Mahindra finally decided to change the design of the Roxor, they went from looking like a Jeep to looking like an FJ Cruiser from the 1960s. Toyota didn't fight back or sue them because they knew these things would never make it, even in the ATV market in the American marketplace. And the American authorities didn't think so either, because it didn't look like an actual vehicle. Like, ATVs don't look like real vehicles for the road, but the Mahindra Roxor does. In the end, they managed to get through their legal battles with Chrysler. They pulled the vehicle from being sold on the roads, and now they sell it as a limited production ATV through their tractor dealerships, and that's it. A helping vehicle for farmers who love their tractors, and that is it. They don't even sell them as off-road ATVs because these things are a little bit bigger than standard side-by-sides. It's kind of like what Candy Tech did with their little pickup truck going into California and selling it as an electric all-terrain farm vehicle that doesn't go over 50 kilometers an hour to try and circumnavigate the chicken tax on their truck as well. But we all know how that wound up. Candy Tech is not around anymore. So you could say that over the years, many companies have tried to circumnavigate around this tariff. A lot of companies know that the American marketplace is the truck kingdom of the world. The only other marketplaces that are great for trucks is Australia, but Australia is flowing with mid-sized trucks, but it doesn't have the population base to make it a big market for any major automobile manufacturers. Gotta remember, the States is nearly 400 million people. And when you add in Canada to that mix, and then Mexico, you're looking at over 500 million consumers if you could sell over here. But unfortunately, the big three are still keeping this chicken tax imposed. And I don't think the Americans' next President-elect Donald Trump, is even going to consider getting rid of the chicken tax at all. Considering the fact he wants to build walls to keep people out, this is a tax that I could see still being in place for the next decade. Today, unless these vehicles are built in the United States, Canada, or Mexico, you're subjected to this chicken tax. Mexico doesn't actually have a chicken tax on any of it, so their small truck market can accept vehicles like the Volkswagen Amarok and the Ram 1000. They can take any of those. So when you cross the border into Mexico, you can see vehicles that we don't get in North America. But unfortunately, these things are subjected to chicken taxes the second they cross into American shores. Doesn't matter that they came in through Mexico and tried to cross over. They were still manufactured outside of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or Canada, US, Mexico Free Trade Agreement is now. So Mexico is the only place within the three that will allow these trucks because they don't have a tariff. Both Canada and the United States has. Canada doesn't really have the tax, but we like to abide by the American marketplace because we know if we did the same thing as Mexico and allowed these vehicles in, we would have them and they would find their way to crossing the border, which means our borders would become more secure to keep products that the Americans don't want in out. And because they're our largest trading partners, we just choose to abide by their rules. So Canada itself abides by the chicken tax law and the Americans. We don't specifically have a law, so you could import these vehicles into our country, but they can never go outside of our borders. Unless you put it on a boat, ship it down to Mexico, you'll never get it there. And considering the fact that the Canadian marketplace is only 40 million people, it's a little bit smaller than the American one. So you're never really going to get into the American marketplace. The chicken tax. It all started with American chicken from American farmers, shipped over to the European Union. And in the end, when you take over too much of market share, as one country taking over too much market share from a multitude of different countries, eventually somebody's going to get pissed off. And today we're seeing that with Chinese electric vehicles. Will China's EVs become the new chicken tax of tomorrow? Europe, Canada, and even the United States is already making it seem like there will be a new chicken tax on electric vehicles. But trucks, all I could say is I really wish we can get some of these vehicles. I don't know about you, but I have a whole whack of friends who would prefer to be driving a Volkswagen Amarok than their Chevy Colorados. So if you like this podcast, please like, share, or comment about it. Click the like button at the bottom. Follow us to find out more about the AutoLooks podcast and the AutoLooks.net website. Big or small, we have them all. Corporate link websites from around the globe, all on the AutoLooks.net website. And then after that, send us an email, send us a text, send us a comment, and tell us about the vehicles you wish we had in North American shores that the chicken tax is impeding us from owning. There's tons and tons of vehicles, and it makes it annoying every time you go out and buy a pickup truck that there's hardly any any competition within those marketplaces. Mid-size pickup trucks, Toyota, Nissan, General Motors products, so Chevy and GM, and Ford. That is it. 4. Really. Dodge isn't back, and none of the other Japanese brands are here. Let's open up the markets. Let's give the people the trucks they want. Because maybe then the Americans will learn how to compete properly on a truck market. Ever notice you go around the globe and you don't see a lot of their pickup trucks in other countries? I can find a Toyota nearly everywhere, but try and find a General Motors pickup truck outside of the United States, Canada, Mexico, China, and Australia. Try and find any of their trucks. You're limited. So after that, stop by the website, check it out, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links website page. Hell, check out the Help website page. We got all kinds of links to great, amazing websites like Fox Motorwear if you're looking for some great threads for either yourself or your significant other, or you just want to spend some time customizing some cool cars. Go to 3D Tuning and check it out. All with links on the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@autolooks.net. So for myself, Everett J, the AutoLooks.net website, and the Ecom Entertainment Group, strap yourself in for this one fun, wild ride we're going to have as we hop on our Chocobo from Final Fantasy, which is essentially a giant chicken, and ride off into the sunset.